400 Tomahawks, 72 hours, 1.44 billion gone. America just burned a decade of production. What's left is alarming. 400 Tomahawks, 72 hours, 1.44 billion gone. America just burned a decade of production. What's left is alarming.
At 1:15 a.m. local time on February 28th, 2026, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer operating in the Persian Gulf registered a fire control solution and released a Tomahawk land attack missile from its vertical launch system. The missile accelerated to 550 miles per hour, dropped to terrain-following altitude, and navigated on GPS and inertial guidance toward a pre-programmed coordinate inside Iran. It cost $3.6 million. It was one of more than 400 fired by U.S. Navy destroyers and submarines in the opening 72 hours of Operation Epic Fury. 400 missiles. 3 days. At $3.6 million per round, that opening salvo represented $1.44 billion in cruise missile expenditure, consumed before a single resupply ship had moved. And the United States had entered that conflict budgeted to purchase 57 new Tomahawks in all of fiscal year 2026. Not 57 per week. Not 57 per month. 57 in 12 months. What happened next exposed a vulnerability that defense planners had spent years pretending did not exist. The vertical launch system cells aboard a U.S. Navy Arleigh Burke-class destroyer represent, in operational terms, the most concentrated package of precision firepower afloat. Each ship carries up to 96 Tomahawk cruise missiles. Those cells also hold Standard missiles for air defense, ASROC anti-submarine weapons, and vertical launch ASROC rounds, a shared magazine serving multiple missions simultaneously. When the opening wave of Operation Epic Fury began at 1:15 a.m. on February 28th, USS Spruance, USS Delbert D. Black, USS Frank E. Peterson Jr., and multiple other destroyers opened their launch hatches across the Arabian Sea and the Persian Gulf, and began expending that magazine at a rate no peacetime production schedule had been built to sustain. Simultaneously, somewhere in the Arabian Sea, at least one Ohio-class guided missile submarine, capable of carrying up to 154 Tomahawks across its missile tubes, added its salvo to the opening barrage. In its first 24 hours, Operation Epic Fury struck more than 1,000 sites across Iran. IRGC command and control centers, the Aerospace Forces headquarters, integrated air defense nodes, ballistic missile sites, naval ships and submarines in port, and military communications infrastructure. Admiral Brad Cooper, CENTCOM commander, described it as multiple waves of cruise missiles obliterating Iranian command and control and air defense capabilities. That was the offensive expenditure. Then Iran fired back, and the defensive expenditure began. And that is where the math starts to get dangerous. A single Tomahawk cruise missile costs $3.6 million, according to CISA's March 2026 analysis. A JDAM-equipped gravity bomb accomplishing a comparable strike against an already neutralized air defense environment costs $80,000. The ratio between those two figures, 45-1, captures the premium the United States paid to strike Iranian targets from standoff range before air superiority was established. Once Iranian air defenses were degraded, the Pentagon shifted doctrine entirely. General Dan Kane announced on March 4th a point of munitions transition, moving away from standoff cruise missiles to closer-in precision bombs. That was the right call for the remaining targets. But the 400 Tomahawks already fired could not be recalled. At 400 missiles expended in 72 hours, the United States had consumed a decade of production at then-current rates. The U.S. military's total Tomahawk stockpile, estimated at between 4,000 and 4,150 rounds as of early 2026, had been reduced by 10% in 3 days. But this was only the beginning of what analysts were about to find. Inside the CISA offices on Rhode Island Avenue in Washington on March 5th, 2026, senior fellow Mackenzie Eaglin, one of the most precise trackers of American munitions industrial capacity, pulled up a chart during a live-streamed event and stated what the numbers showed without editorial softening. The reconciliation funds that Congress had appropriated for extra missile procurement in FY 2026 were, she acknowledged, meaningful. And then she stated what they were not. Look at the number of SM-3s or LRASMs or Tomahawks, she said. She would not be surprised if a comparable number had already been used in just the past couple of days. The clock was ticking, she said. Get stuff on contract and get it going fast. The context for that urgency was the procurement record she had been tracking for years. In FY 2023, the Navy bought 68 Tomahawks. In FY 2024, 34. In FY 2025, a planned 22, though that figure was revised upward. In FY 2026, the budget had authorized 57. The FY 2025 budget for the Navy had at one point projected buying only 22 Tomahawks in a single year. During Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003, the United States fired roughly 800 Tomahawks in the opening invasion. Replacing that single campaign's expenditure at the FY 2025 procurement rate of 22 missiles per year would take 36 years. Eaglin had written in a 2024 analysis for the American Enterprise Institute, "Victory in the next war will require a robust arsenal and deeper magazine depth." And she had been right. The production logs told a different story than the deterrence posture. But the stockpile problem was only half the equation. The other half was the manufacturing physics that no budget supplemental could immediately override. Each Tomahawk requires up to 24 months to manufacture from contract award to delivery, according to reporting by Military.com and confirmed by multiple defense industry analyses. The missile is not complicated in concept. It is a 20-foot, 3,000-pound GPS-navigating turbofan cruise missile with terrain-following radar and a 1,000-pound warhead, but it is a precision instrument assembled from specialized components whose supply chain is narrow, single-sourced in critical places, and cannot be instantaneously scaled. The turbofan engine, the guidance electronics, the solid rocket booster for the launch phase, the data link receiver, each component has its own lead time, its own supplier base, its own industrial constraints. As vertical research partners analyst Rob Stallard told Reuters in the opening days of Epic Fury, manufacturers just can't make them fast enough. There is already way more missile demand than supply, and Iran exacerbates the issue. Even the emergency production agreement that RTX had signed with the Pentagon on February 4, 2026, 3 weeks before the opening strikes, in what now appeared as striking prescience, contained that same constraint inside its terms. The agreement targeted Tomahawk production at over 1,000 missiles per year, more than a tenfold increase from the pre-war baseline. But the lag time to achieve that new production rate from contract to delivery carries a 2 to 3 year ramp window. As the national interest noted, citing Pentagon planning timelines, that is with a 2 to 3 year lag time to get America's defense industrial base geared up to meet increased demand. The 400 Tomahawks fired in the first 72 hours of Epic Fury would be replaced, but not before 2028, at the earliest, under any scenario involving real industrial physics. Then analysts ran a scenario that no one in the room wanted to discuss out loud. In the years preceding Operation Epic Fury, the Pentagon had been explicit about why Tomahawk stockpile depth mattered beyond the Middle East. Vice Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Jim Kilby had testified before lawmakers in May 2025 that the Navy was seeking to expedite munitions replacements in the event of a future conflict with China. Retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, cited by Defense Scoop, stated on the record regarding the PRSM missile's debut in Epic Fury, he would hope it was more of a demonstration launch and that PRSMs were being conserved for future use in the Pacific theater. Every Tomahawk fired at an Iranian air defense radar is a Tomahawk not sitting in a vertical launch cell aboard a destroyer transiting the Taiwan Strait. Every SM-3 expended over the Persian Gulf is an SM-3 not available to intercept a DF-21D anti-ship ballistic missile in the Western Pacific. The Tomahawk is not simply a Middle Eastern weapon. It is the U.S. Navy's primary first-night standoff strike instrument across every theater on Earth, the missile that suppresses adversary integrated air defense systems before manned aircraft enter contested airspace. Japan ordered 400 Tomahawks in 2024 to equip its destroyers for exactly this role in a Taiwan contingency. With the U.S. stockpile reduced by 10% in 3 days of a Middle Eastern campaign, those Japanese delivery timelines, already extended, are now further at risk. Australia, which has also sought Tomahawk integration for its surface fleet, faces the same delay. Catherine Thompson, senior fellow at the Cato Institute, framed the strategic consequence in precise terms. Employment of munitions in campaigns like Operation Epic Fury could limit optionality for the U.S. in the Indo-Pacific. Judd Crane, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Force Readiness, confirmed that any mitigation, modifying shot doctrine, substituting alternate munitions, introduces additional risk, and that risk is ultimately borne by service members. If you're still watching, understand what this number means. The U.S. expended a decade of its own production in 3 days, and the adversary drained that stockpile against was not China. The production history behind this deficit is not a record of malice, is a record of assumptions. fluctuating Navy orders across the mid-2020s, 68 in one year, 30 for the next, 22 the year after, had created exactly what defense economists predicted: unstable production lines and deter manufacturers from expanding capacity. When a customer orders 34 missiles in one fiscal year, a manufacturer does not hire 500 additional skilled workers, build a new production hall, or negotiate multi-year raw material contracts. They sustain the minimum infrastructure to fulfill the order. Then, when the next order comes in at 68 or falls to 22, the manufacturer adjusts again. There is no stable production base to surge from because there was never a stable demand signal to build one around. This is the mechanism by which decades of procurement decisions compound into a single week of strategic exposure. The Dwight D. Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group had already demonstrated this trajectory. During its deployment from November 2023 to June 2024, the Eisenhower alone fired 155 defensive missiles against Houthi attacks and 135 Tomahawks striking Houthi targets. One carrier strike group, 8 months, 290 missiles. The stockpile had been declining before Epic Fury began. The Iran campaign accelerated a trajectory that was already running in the wrong direction. As Military.com documented in a comprehensive investigation published in October 2025, between October 2023 and January 2025 alone, the Navy fired more defensive missiles at incoming Houthi drones and rockets than it had used in 3 decades following Desert Storm. That was the baseline. Epic Fury was the acceleration. They didn't lose this advantage in battle. They legislated it away, line item by line item, fiscal year by fiscal year, until the stockpile met the conflict it had no reserve depth to absorb. If the trajectory does not change, if the production ramp is ordered but not contracted, contracted but not funded, funded but not delivered, the window between the current depletion and the next contingency narrows with every day that passes without a missile leaving a factory floor. Here is the reckoning as of March 6, 2026, 7 days into Operation Epic Fury. Tomahawks fired in the opening 72 hours, approximately 400. Cost of those 400 missiles, $1.44 billion. Total U.S. Tomahawk stockpile before the campaign, estimated 4,000 to 4,150 rounds. Percentage of stockpile consumed in 72 hours, 10%. FY 2026 Tomahawk procurement authorized before the campaign, 57 missiles. Annual production rate at the pre-war baseline, approximately 90 to 100 per year. Time required to replenish 400 Tomahawks at 57 per year procurement, approximately 7 years. Time required at the pre-war production baseline of 90 to 100, approximately 4 to 5 years. New RTX production target under the February 4th Emergency Agreement, over 1,000 per year. Lag time to achieve that target from the signing date, 2 to 3 years. Minimum year the U.S. restores its opening stockpile depth at the new rate, 2029 at the earliest. Operation Iraqi Freedom Tomahawk expenditure in 2003, approximately 800. Time to replace those 800 at the FY 2026 procurement rate of 57, over 14 years. Total Tomahawks produced across all variants since 1983, 8,919. Total expended in combat before Epic Fury, more than 2,465. Supplemental funding being considered by Congress as of March 6th, triple-digit billions per Mackenzie Eaglin. Tom Caraco of Size stated plainly on March 3rd, to replenish what was used this week and ramp up production rates dramatically, it will almost certainly require some kind of supplemental. The politics on the Hill are not especially amenable to that, but it needs to be done. The solutions in confirmed development are real. The RTX Framework Agreement targets more than 1,000 Tomahawks annually across a 7-year contract, backed by supply chain partnerships with Anduril, Northrop Grumman, Avio USA, and NAMO to resolve the solid rocket motor bottleneck that has historically capped cruise missile output. Lockheed Martin received a $122.6 million contract addition in March 2026 to accelerate JSSMER production. The Air Force and Navy had already begun shifting to B-1B Lancer bomb trucks carrying AGM-158 JSSM strikes as a deliberate measure to conserve the remaining Tomahawk inventory for future Pacific contingencies. CENTCOM confirmed the combat debut of the Lucas drone, the low-cost unmanned combat attack system, modeled directly on Iran's own Shahid design, as a deliberate cost substitution measure, replacing $3.6 million cruise missiles with significantly cheaper one-way attack systems for appropriate target sets. That doctrinal adaptation was correct. Its limitation is that it arrived on day one of the conflict, rather than years earlier when the stockpile first began its decline. This story is not just about missiles and money. The most expensive weapon in the world is worthless the moment its magazine runs empty, or when the magazine must be rationed against two theaters simultaneously. For decades, American strategic power in the Middle East, the Pacific, and the Atlantic rested on an assumption of abundance, that the United States had more precision-guided standoff weapons than any scenario could consume. What 3 days of Operation Epic Fury demonstrated is that abundance was a historical artifact, not a current condition. The U.S. burned through 15 years of Tomahawk stockpile in 5 years of global operations. Then it fired 10% of what remained in 72 hours. Power does not always announce itself with a decisive battle. Sometimes it arrives in a procurement spreadsheet, in a production rate held at 57 per year, while adversaries calculated exactly how many days of combat that supported. The most dangerous gap in any defense system is not in the radar coverage, not in the kill chain. It is in the assumption that the magazine will never actually run out. If you're still watching, tap like so more people understand what the real cost of this conflict looks like on the production floor. Comment empty rack if you think the Tomahawk shortage deserves more coverage than it's getting. Share this with anyone who still believes American military power is unlimited and unconditional. Because the most dangerous assumption a superpower can make is not that it could be defeated. It is that the adversary, any adversary, cannot calculate how many missiles are left, how long they take to replace, and how few days of high-intensity combat stand between the current stockpile and a rack that is empty. That calculation has already been made. The only question now is whether the production lines move faster than the missiles get fired.